fossil and nuclear energy is neither sufficient nor safe or sustainable. We need to accelerate the global energy transition by drastically increasing renewable energy expansion and by decarbonizing the entire global economy. How can we not only accelerate renewable energy production, but also renewable energy usage? How can the uptake of renewables transition from ambition to action?
So welcome back, everyone, to this ministerial panel on the global energy transition, translating ambition into action. You'll remember that our opening ceremony just now closed with that rousing call to act, and that's what we want to talk about right now. Because as you know, ladies and gentlemen, transforming our energy systems offers enormous opportunities beyond climate protection, energy security, sustainable economic growth, profitable investments, and good jobs, which is why more and more countries are in fact ramping up their Energiewende ambitions. And we are not talking about the far-off future. As Economy and Climate Protection Minister Robert Habeck reminded us this morning, tools, technologies, and policies that accelerate uptake of clean, sustainable energy are widely known and available now. In this session, we want to focus on key levers in areas ranging from decarbonizing heavy industry to electrification, from land use planning and infrastructure development to supply chains and investments. We'll also spotlight initiatives to foster international cooperation and ask which institutions at which level can most effectively translate ambition into action. And we begin with a dialogue with the head of the International Renewable Energy Agency, IRENA, which of course has been mentioned countless times over the last day and a half, and whose World Energy Transitions Outlook, WETO, reveals how much we can achieve with the levers at our disposal. Formerly Director General of Sustainable Development and EU and International Affairs at the Italian Ministry of the Environment, he was recently elected to his second term as Director General of IRENA. It is a great honor to welcome Francesco La Camera with us today. Let's give him a nice round of applause. And Francesco, I mentioned the WETO, and in fact, IRENA has just yesterday released the preview of its World Energy Transitions Outlook 2023, which you also talked about in your BETD press conference, as I understand it. In the 2022 edition, IRENA laid out a roadmap to 2030, defining concrete measures to stay on the 1.5 degree path and pointing out that we are not on track at the moment. How did the world do during the last year compared to your roadmap? Looking at the overall global picture, how optimistic are you about where we stand now?
So first of all, thanks for having IRENA with you as a tradition. We are already present at the BETD, and here we present our World Energy Transition Outlook. And so it's a very great pleasure to be in our second house as IRENA, as you have heard, and also a pleasure to work and talk with Melinda. That's also very close collaborating with IRENA. So I think all have said that we are off track. So we are not in line for the achievement of the Paris Agreement goals. And this year will have a special meaning, because one thing is that IRENA or other agency may say we are not on track. But the question is that this year, the UNFCCC, in this COP, in the stocktake, will formally say that countries, government, has not fulfilled the promises of the Paris Agreement. So this is, I think, something that makes the difference in making our affirmation. 2 years ago, we said that the windows of opportunity were closing. I don't know if you remember this, Melinda.
Yes, I do indeed.
Last time we have been together, we said that we need a disruption in the way we produce and consume energy. The fact that this has not happened. So what we have assisted and what we can monitor is that very clearly we are going to a new energy system. And we also know that this is a process that will be not stopped by anyone. So we are going to a new energy system that will be largely dominated by renewables, complemented by hydrogen, mainly green, and the sustainable use of biomass. And this is because policies in the last decade and then the market make the difference. Now, we register that renewables are the most competitive way to produce electricity almost in all parts of the world. Installed capacity, any here new record of new renewable installed capacity has been mentioned, and I love to hear that government are starting to use our number more often. We are 84% of the new installed capacity last year was renewable. The other 60% were all the other form of producing energy. But the fact is that these are the only good news that we have. Because unfortunately, year after year, the gap between where we are and where we should be is widening. So we have said last year that we needed to triple the installed capacity of renewables. The fact is now we have to more than triple the installed capacity of renewables. Just to give you numbers that could be very simple. Last year we have 295 gigawatts of renewable capacity installed, really a record. But it's not the 800 or 900 that we have expected already in 2020, happening every year. So now what it means? It means that we have to have 10,000 gigawatts of renewable installed capacity in 2030, and now we have 7 years. So now the goal is having 1,000 of new installed capacity of renewables. So we see that it's becoming more and more challenging, be on the right path.
Let's dig a little bit deeper on that. We were talking yesterday about the impetus that has been provided by the energy crisis, and I quoted The Economist, which said that, in fact, the Energiewende has been turbocharged and believes that as many as 10 years could have been knocked off the timeline. But you're telling us we still have to move faster. We certainly can't start to relax. So tell us, if you would, what are the most important measures that public and private actors need to take right now to accelerate the expansion of renewables at the scale that you are talking about?
So first of all, we are very thankful to The Economist that say this. In fact, we said together, Melinda, in March of the last year that this was going to happen. And because everyone may agree that the narrative was there, was mainstream, is mainstream, that renewables are most competitive, are a clean form of producing electricity, so the technology that we need to use for being compliant with the Paris Agreement. But now there is a added argument in favor of the new energy system and renewables. So the energy security. Could you think 5 years ago that people may think that renewables are important for energy security? Now everyone has understood, finally, could say that this decentralization of the energy system is the best way to ensure reliance, resilience, and also to provide energy security. This applies naturally for the source of energy and also for the supply chain that we have to consider how to decentralize the supply chain in a way to be more efficient. But what has to be done? So this is the question more than for me, is for the COP28. So when formally UNFC recognized that we are not on track, so how to close the gap? Naturally, IRENA, because IRENA is ambitious, as you know, want to work on this, is working on that, and we are trying to build a narrative that may be part of the discussion. If we have been building our preview of our veto in a language, in a way that could be easy in some way for the negotiator to capture the wording and the targets that are there to fit the building of the new narrative. So concerning targets, please go, the preview is already available on our website. The 1,000 gigawatt is there in installed capacity, but we have also been able to provide targets on how we have to decrease the fossil fuel presence in the final energy consumption be substituted by renewables. So every 5 years, so to be also in coherent timing with the stocktake exercise, every 5 years, we put the objective, the goals that we have to achieve for be coherent with the Paris Agreement. Concerning the narrative, in our point of view, there must be a reason why we are not going fast enough. It's not by chance, because renewables are the most competitive way. So why we are not progressing faster? We think that there are some, structural problem that has to be solved, especially when we look at the area of the world like Africa and Southeast Asia. So we have tried to elaborate in 3 different pillars the infrastructure world. So what we say, that first of all, we need to invest in the physical infrastructure. How we can think that we can enhance the green hydrogen trade in Africa if we have not the pipelines, if the harbors are not ready. How we can do that? So this also applies for Europe. The rich Europe cannot, at the moment, capable to utilize all the potential of the offshore wind of the North Sea, because we have not the infrastructure that are ready to absorb the energy and ensuring interconnectivity, flexibility, and balancing of the system. So this is the first thing to think about. This is the first barrier that we have to abate. The other one is not always we have the legal and policy provisions in place. So we are trying also in our veto to suggest policies that can be used by and be present in the COP28 deliberation. The third aspect that we need to concentrate is on the institutional capacity, because managing all this need institutional capacity. And also the professional skills. So if you allow 1 minute, I want to repeat this concept.
A super short minute, if you don't mind.
Absolutely, because someone have already said renewables are intermittent, so we cannot use at large. This is a fake. Everything is intermittent, also oil and gas. And we have discovered under the Ukrainian crisis how gas is intermittent.
Yeah.
So what is make things not to be intermittent is the structure that sustain the energy system. So what make possible for gas starting from one point and arriving in my house? This structure has been taken more than 100 years for saving the actual energy system, centralized and based on fossil fuel. And still part of the world is not enjoying energy services. This infrastructure is not able to fulfill 100% and sustain the building of a new energy system. So this is something that we have to have in mind in our perspective, if we want to really try to accelerate our path.
And we're going to talk, for example, about how to finance that, something that you have done a lot of work on at IRENA. So stay with me right here. Please, let's give him a warm round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. And earlier we heard from our youth keynote about the required reading of the newest IPCC report, and I'd say the WITO 2023 is equally required reading, since it sounds like it could become something of a roadmap for COP28. Thank you so much. So let me now, without further ado, welcome the rest of our panel onto the stage, and I will just keep the introductions very short in order to maximize our time, starting with Agnès Pannier-Runacher. She is France's Minister for the Energy Transition. She previously served as Minister Delegate for Industry in France's Economy and Finance Ministry, and has held, no, this one right here, if you would, please, that's my seat, and has held leading positions in the private sector. Welcome to you. Next, I'd like to greet German Galushenko. He is Ukraine's Minister of Energy. Oh, he's not here. Okay, well, we hope that he will join us shortly. Then I will greet Jean-Marie Paugam. He is Deputy Director General of the World Trade Organization. He's an expert on trade and has also held senior positions in the French Ministry of Economy and Finance. And I'm going to suggest we just leave that chair open in case he comes. I'll ask here he is. Wonderful. Welcome, dear Minister of Energy German Galushenko from Ukraine. Right here, please, if you would, sir. Thank you. Great to have you. That's what we call a just-in-time arrival. I'm also very pleased to welcome Sirpa Yavinpa. She is the Fund Director of the Southeast Asia Energy Transition Partnership located in Bangkok and co-hosted with the United Nations Office for Project Services. She has also worked with UNDP and the Asian Development Bank. And I'm very glad to greet Solenaina Andrea Manam Pisoa. He is Minister of Energy and Hydrocarbons from Madagascar. And just a word to you, dear audience, he will speak in French, so you will want to have headsets if you would like to have a translation for that. And finally, Alvaro Pardo is President of the National Mining Agency of Colombia, and he will be simultaneously interpreted from Spanish. Welcome to you, Excellency. And before, I'm going to ask everybody to please take your seats. And then before we get our panel's take on our topic, let's go to our Slido tool, everyone, and ask you to please vote on this multiple choice question. What are the most powerful levers for reducing global greenhouse gas emissions during the next 5 to 10 years? And you see the choices in front of you: expand renewable energy production, capacity, decarbonize industry, electrify mobility, replace fossil-based heating and cooling, provide more and better project financing, and finally, increase energy efficiency. Please vote now, and we'll come back a little bit later to take a look at the result. Now let's talk about the levers that you, dear panel, consider the most effective for accelerating the energy transition. And I will begin, if I may, with you, Madame Pannier-Runacher. The French government wants to double the share of renewable energy in its total energy mix from 20% at present to 40% by 2030. We just heard Francesco saying we have to set clear targets. Clearly, you are doing that. And a new law streamlines procedures for setting up new renewable energy projects. So tell us more about that, if you would, because we've talked a lot about red tape and permitting as one of the obstacles in the way. And would you say this is the beginning, possibly, of a pivot away from nuclear power, which does still account for 60 to 70% of your energy, which is the highest share in the world?
Yes, indeed. Thank you very, very much for inviting me at this panel, and it's great to be here in Germany. So like Germany, France is now fully committed to reach net zero carbon in 2050, and I will give maybe just a step up regarding our energy strategy. We have 4 levers to reach this target and to reach the 2030 targets that we contributed to, or to voted, I would say, through the French presidency of the European Union, because, as you know, the global agreement on Fit for 55 climate package of Europe was done under the French presidency, and we were really struggling to reach that. The 4 pillars are energy efficiency, obviously, so how to reduce through technologies, the use of energy in buildings, in transportation, in agriculture, in industry, etc. The second pillar, which is key for us now, is how to avoid waste of energy, is how to change our behavior to reduce the use of energy. For instance, we may consider that there is too much light in this room, and to reduce the use of energy.
Sure feels like it up here, doesn't it?
So just to give an example, and we have launched a plan toward that. The third pillar is the deployment of renewable energy, and the fourth is to carry on using nuclear energy, because, as you know, nuclear energy is emitting less CO2 than sun power energy and than wind power energy. So it's quite interesting to have that in mind. Having that in mind, we have launched in October an energy sobriety plan. So we managed to reduce by 10% the use of combined electricity and gas. So not only gas, we have in the middle of European target for gas, but we have also launched a plan for electricity. And on the production side, we have launched this double track, nuclear and renewable. For renewable, interesting to know also that we are exactly on the same pace as Germany to develop renewable. We used to have 13% of renewable in 2012, and we have now 19% in 2021, and this is exactly the same figure for Germany. So maybe when you think about France, you think nuclear, but when it comes to renewable, this is exactly the same track. So how do we accelerate that? Alleviating red tape, that is true, but we have to balance that with ensuring that we are not having problems with biodiversity. There is clearly a balance to be found, especially when it comes to sun power, because it uses land. So we have had a track to use already artificialized land, but to be very cautious regarding natural land. And other levers is to divide project approval time by 2 and secure them against appeals. To prioritize, to put the local authorities at the heart of the deployment of renewable, because they are not a bit cautious about that, but we see that they are switching due to the climate crisis and the energy crisis, and they want to show that they are hitting the game and that they are ready to develop new sun facilities, new wind facilities, new biogas facilities, and they can do that on the field. And last but not least, we have tried to better share the value of those renewables to ensure that the inhabitants and that the local authorities will directly benefit from the implementation of new renewables.
Very interesting. Thank you very much for that contribution. Let me go to Minister Galushenko. And your country, too, has traditionally relied on nuclear for a high share of its energy needs. As we discussed yesterday, your energy system and infrastructure have been the target of massive attacks by Russia in this war. Discussion of reconstruction is already underway. So given the promise that it holds for you of boosting energy independence and security, will renewable energy be high on the political agenda, and what levers would you prioritize to bring it forward?
Thank you. Thank you for I think that is a very important point which we discuss, and that is really the future of the energy system, not only about Ukraine, about the whole world. But what is very important, and probably I want to shift the angle a little bit due to what we've seen in Ukraine during these attacks on the energy infrastructure. In our plans, we see the future of Ukrainian mixes. We still really have the basic generation, the nuclear, and we see that the 50%, now it's even more than 50, produced by the nuclear fleet in Ukraine, and 50 is renewables. And I can tell you that renewables is not only because of the green transitions or because of the obligations which we mentioned to Paris Agreement, I mean, and everything. What we see during these attacks, the renewables is also about national security and security of supply. And why? Because we see that, for instance, the Ukrainian energy system was hit 271 times, was hit. So they reached the targets 271 times from the 10th of October. And that is only 20% of all missiles, drones, artillery they use.
So you could imagine how massive this attacks. And we see that we had the situation, for instance, when we had in one region of the country, in some part of the country, we had the nuclear stations. And due to this attack, they split the system. We cannot transmit electricity from nuclear stations, and at the same time, we cannot consume in these regions this amount of electricity. So, and we have to restrict production, for instance, on the west, and at the same time, we see the deficit in the center. And it gives us the understanding that renewables, which could be generation in all regions of the country, could be the best solutions for security of supply. Because even from the military point of view, it's much difficult to target so many points all around the country. When they use modern missiles, they use everything, I mean, what they can use from the military point of view. And we understand that that is absolutely the right direction to feel safe. And of course, we're still obliged to go to the green transitions, and we really want to do this. And I can tell you that before these full-scale inventions, we already reached quite a good results. Something around 10% of all generation was renewables. But what Russians did, they destroy up to 90% of wind is destroyed. Up to 40% of solar destroyed. And they occupied the south part now temporarily, south part of Ukraine, where that was the best areas for renewables. And we understand that, of course, we need due to the attacks and destruction, we see that all our plans, because in our energy strategy, we are planning to have 25% of renewables by 2032. But now we see that due to destruction, and so our plan to gradually phase out coal, due to the destruction of the thermal generation, due to the destruction of mines, we lost a lot of mines because of the occupation, because of the war. We need to speed up. We need to speed up. We do not want to be rebuild as it was before. I mean, the thermal generation, that's old units, which is more than 40 years old. And of course, we understand that we need to speed up this renewables transformation because it's not only about green transition. Because that is, for us, now we see that that is absolutely about the security of supply and security for the country. And that is a very important message, because frankly speaking, we never look from that angle. I mean, because we speak about the green transition, I mean, the obligation, and that is very important. Yeah. But now we see that that's not only this point. And I think that I hope no one would, I mean, no state would face the challenges which we go through this winter. Because I can tell you, I mean, that is something beyond the understanding what they are doing, because that is not a battlefield, that is not a front line. So they attack the energy infrastructure all around the country. So if you see the map of Ukraine, there is no region which was not hit by missiles. And in all regions, that is generation, that is substations, and I mean, that is like, we could find the notion of this in international legal instruments, which is terror. Yeah. But renewables is really a very important solution.
Thank you very much. And I think so many of us have seen also the images of the warming centers that you constructed so that those who had no more heat or power could take shelter. And indeed, we're talking here not about economic security or even access security. We're talking about physical life and death security. So many thanks for that. Deputy Director General, it's wonderful that the WTO is with us because trade in renewable energy components is often also hampered by regulations. We spoke a moment ago about permitting regulations, but tariff and non-tariff barriers, including also not only technical ones, but subsidies to domestic suppliers, are becoming an impediment to trade in important RE components. So how concerned are you about a shift away from multilateral trade in general to nation-first strategies, precisely in connection with the new interest in energy security and autonomy? And what's your message to countries and multilateral institutions as they shape strategies for the energy transition?
Well, thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. Actually, you're right. Trade should act as a natural booster for the energy transition because trade expands the market, so decreases the cost of investment by promoting economies of scale, selecting best innovation, and in general, helping to organize the economy in an optimal manner in terms of use of natural resources. And trade policy should be mobilized to accelerate that and to foster that dynamic. For instance, we know from economic studies that the tariffs in the world are biased in favor of high-intensity carbon activities. So that means brown products are being taxed less than green products. So there should be a rebalancing of that, and that could be a contribution of trade policy. Unfortunately, this is not happening, as you rightly reminded us in your introduction, for 2 or 3 reasons. The first one is that climate policies in general, decarbonization policies, are being uncoordinated around the world. So that means everybody is going after the same goal, which is increasing the cost of carbon or the price of carbon, but with different approaches. You have pricing approaches, for instance, in the EU. You have non-pricing approaches, for instance, in the US. But at the end of the day, it gives some elements of fragmentation of those policies. For instance, we already have in the world more than 70 carbon taxes which are being enforced. Or when it comes to measuring the content of carbon in a product, for instance, if you take the steel sector, which is a very important sector in terms of emission, 8%, you already have 20 standards for accounting how much carbon in the steels. So there is some element of fragmentation, and we see also in the energy sector, we have a database with all the technical measures which are being notified. There are a lot with local contents, import certification requirements which are. So that is the first one. The second reason is that there is more and more a mix between different type of intentions. One is climate policies, but also industrial policies and also security policies. So these are mixing up, of course, for very legitimate reason. It's not for me to comment on the motivation, but sometimes one stone cannot kill 3 birds at one time. So you might have to think about the arbitrage between your trade intentions and your security intentions at one point. And the third element is that in the short term, the war between Russia and Ukraine has generated a very bad policy mix, because we saw a huge increase of fossil fuel subsidies, mostly with the idea of combating high energy prices, or those inflation-generated subsidies. We have now more than 1 trillion in the world of fossil fuel subsidies which are there. At the same time, we see more and more subsidies to clean, renewable, green energy sources. So there is a contradiction here in the policy mix, which has to be rebalanced, and little by little, there will be a need for a rollback of fossil fuel subsidies. Now, the good news is that what we have seen as a consequence of the war is when it comes to national security, countries can act very fast. And there has been, in the field of energy, a lot of trade measures in the first 2-3 months after the outbreak of the war, which has been taken on import, export restrictions, subsidies. So when it comes to immediate, clear and present danger, country moves. So can that happen in the field of decarbonization and climate? I think so. I think that was one of the messages that we heard from Minister Barbeck yesterday, is that can we consider climate change as a national security issue? And the second lesson is that not everyone has to do the same thing at the same time. There is some element of idiosyncrasies or comfort that each country needs to have in mixing its trade policy with its carbon policy. So I hope we can take that direction. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'm just going to jump over Francesco, but I'm going to take one of your messages with me in my question to Sirpa Yavinpa. And I want to come back later in a second round to talk specifically about the Southeast Asia Transition Partnership. But let me ask you a more general question first about finance, because many international institutions have called attention to the fact that international financial streams as they stand right now, and especially project finance, and this includes studies by IRENA, are woefully inadequate to support a global energy transition at the scale that we need. So, in your view, what levers can most effectively and pragmatically unleash more capital quickly?
Thank you, Melinda, and thanks to the German Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate Action for inviting the Southeast Asian Energy Transition Partnership here to the event on global energy transition. So, global energy transition certainly will require a lot of capital. The estimates are running in trillions, around just shy of 1%, IMF estimates, after the replacement costs have been, the regular replacement costs have been netted out. But I want to point out that the benefits are enormous. So there's really enormous environmental benefits. They've already come out in several speakers' comments. Productivity and employment benefits are also very significant. Energy resilience and energy security came up as well earlier. And of course, price stability, national competitiveness benefits. So the capital costs really dwarf when we start to consider the high rates of return. Nevertheless, when you talk about the mounting bill, what we are experiencing in the global south, and particularly in Southeast Asia where Energy Transition Partnership works, is the access to that finance being an issue. Mm-hmm. So this access in many of these countries is behind a significant policy adjustment, policy reform, so that the policies actually align with the climate commitment. So there's a key issue, and this is very political, that policy adjustment operates in the political domain. Also to de-risk the investment policies to ensure that the investment actually can flow into energy efficiency and renewable energy destinations. We've also mentioned here the need to integrate digital technologies into the infrastructure to make it sustainable. And in some countries, in many countries where we operate, this requires institutional reform. Again, another political ask. And underpinning all of the issues that I just mentioned is really knowledge, bridging the knowledge gaps among policymakers, among investment institutions, financing institutions, and other stakeholders in energy transition. At ETP, we work on this agenda on a daily basis, and we really find that it's the political economy that puts forward the greatest of the barriers. In these rapidly growing economies where also energy demand is galloping ahead, we really need very carefully curated roadmaps that, on the one hand, enable financing of retirement of the fossil fuel assets, these stranded assets, and on the other hand, enable finance for the renewable energy deployment. And all along looking at how do we integrate the people's concerns? How is this transition going to be fair and just for all? So I just want to emphasize when we think about these huge numbers, trillions in terms of capital investments, that we also emphasize the importance of public-private partnerships, such as in what is going on with ETP, to enhance the access to finance. The key message is that it is the private sector that has the capacity to finance these capital costs, but it is the public sector that needs to make the adjustments to these policies. what's critical here is that we would level the playing field to become competitive. And I just want to leave you with one message here, that in very plain language, this means reduction in the subsidies that are going toward the fossil fuels, which again will provide for the capital investment, as we are also looking at the charging the economic cost of the fossil fuel generated damage to the economy through carbon pricing. So thank you, Melinda, for that question.
Thank you very much. And in speaking about the need for a clear national plan, you echo what we heard yesterday from the head of Sustainable Energy for All, Madam Ogumbidi, who said absolutely crucial to have a plan that is very transparent and clear about the entire picture, including the costs that will be associated with the changes. So let me go now to Minister Andrea Manampisoa. And project finance, of course, is also very important for Madagascar in your effort to electrify rural areas through off-grid and mini-grid solutions. What kind of obstacles do you encounter in seeking capital for these kinds of projects? Are the hurdles greater than they would be for larger installations?
Merci. Tout d'abord, c'est ce que j'ai retenu du thème de ce matin, c'est comment
thank you.
on transforme notre ambition
Let me first say the following.
et ces actions
The first question is how can we translate our ambition into action, because we can quantify our targets. We have to make sure that we're going beyond words.
Permettez-moi tout d'abord vous
Before looking at the specific case of financing in Madagascar, I would like to explain to you Madagascar's challenges regarding the energy transition. A large part of the population in sub-Saharan Africa has no access to energy and not to electricity.
dans la mesure où le continent regorge
This is a very difficult situation because the continent has an abundance of resources which could be used to produce energy, particularly renewable energy. Just think of solar energy or wind power.
pays africains. Madagascar aussi doit augmenter sensiblement
Many African countries
en matière
have already tried to make use of this growth potential, and this is what Madagascar is doing as well, particularly when it comes to electrification, and we need investment for this.
et une île qui est suffisamment
One of the particular circumstances of our country is that we are a big island. We have a surface of more than 500,000 square kilometers.
et c'est une
Just to give you a clue, that's probably that's as much as the surface of France and Belgium combined. And
est très faible parce que
we have a young population of 9 million inhabitants.
personne par kilomètre carré.
And the population density is very low. We have only 40 people per square kilometers.
Très isolé et parfois dans des géographies
And it is also quite a remote area with different geographical circumstances.
de manière viable. Le taux d'accès
And this makes electrification a challenge. It makes it a challenge to provide the population with access to electricity. 15% of our energy supply are provided by the government, and the rest is covered by the public sector. This is quite a low share compared with the average in sub-Saharan Africa, where it's about 48%. So the energy mix of our country is as follows. So of the 33%, we are still using a lot of heavy oil and other fossil fuels.
95
The national electricity provider supplies energy to about 95 remote areas, and the private sector
approvisionne à peu près 400 localités.
is providing electricity to 150 remote areas.
La répartition
So this shows you
dans notre projet
that there's a lot of fragmentation in electricity supply. Madagascar has
intensifié
set the goal to provide electricity to all its population, to provide access especially to rural areas, and this is to be based predominantly on renewables using mini-grids. This is a great challenge for us that we are currently working on. There are currently around 5 million households, 30% of which are connected to the grid. This means that around 6.5 million households that still need to be supplied with electricity. So those are the numbers. Now speaking about financing. Recently, we've tried to tackle this challenge, but access to financing is still very difficult because the banks are very difficult to convince to give us financing, and we have a rate of around 14 to 15%, and also the private sector is very reluctant. There are many partners, also partners from abroad, who are willing to bridge this gap, but then we need to provide government guarantees or also independent guarantees. We have tried to do business with the IMF as well, but there's little room to maneuver regarding the provision of these guarantees. Access to energy, of course, also depends on access to financing and also on public-private partnerships, as the person speaking before me already said. And this is a challenge that we need to overcome. We need access to financing, we need access to guarantees. There are partners who would be willing to provide financing, but then we always face the problem of providing guarantees, which are asked for by these partners. And even if we manage to receive subsidies from these partners, we can see that we need to really fight a lot to complete renewable energy projects, because even if it's only small projects, we always need to take into account that completion takes up to 4 years in our country, and we need to speed up these projects in order to reach our target of reducing emissions by 50%. Our environment is greatly impacted by the consequences of climate change, and pollution does not stop at borders. Our population is suffering from this. And the population in Madagascar is really suffering from the impact of climate destruction, of environmental destruction. Thank you.
Let me go to Colombia now and return to the topic of the importance of having a clear national plan. Colombia has very good natural conditions to generate energy from renewables, yet currently renewables account for less than 5% of your power. Oil remains your largest source of energy. But your new president wants to change that. And in fact, he has made Colombia the first large fossil fuel producing and exporting nation to say it's time to leave it in the ground. In COP27, he called not just on Colombia, but on the world to leave fossil fuels behind. That's not an easy task for a country that's one of the top coal producers worldwide and heavily depends on those exports. So how does your country plan to achieve this? And in your view, as president of the mining agency, can Colombia afford it?
Bueno, en primer lugar, muy buenos días a todos y todas. Muchísimas gracias al gobierno alemán y al Ministerio de Economía por la organización de este foro y por la invitación a participar en el mismo. Muy difícil.
So thank you so much for inviting us to this discussion. And we are, of course, a country that very much depends as a country on coal and oil. And it is, of course, also the fact that we have a new government, and we have that for 9 months now. And they are very much focused on tackling this issue. We are very concerned about climate change, and our government is very committed to that. And we have to contribute to that, looking at the very urgent crisis on our planet. Now, the question is, how can we decarbonize our industry? And we have plans in place to step-by-step decarbonize our industry, our country, to move away from carbon-based fuels and oil, and to boost renewables. Now, when it comes to coal, we are not going to enter into it, or when it comes to oil, rather, we are not going to enter into new exploitation contracts. And we will also keep an eye on our coal mines. Less than 1% of CO2 emissions comes from our country, but we understand that we have to contribute to a solution, and Colombia is very vulnerable to climate change due to its location. And that is, of course, one task for our government. We are currently developing a national development plan that's currently discussed in our Congress, and that includes phasing out fossil fuels. We want to keep resources within our country, and our goal is to expand renewables quickly. And I think Colombia has a lot of potential to do that. Our energy mix consists up to 70% from water resources. We have about 20% from fossil fuels and others. And the entire potential has to be used. Solar energy, wind energy, geothermal energy, water and hydro energy, and hydrogen is important as well. And I think it is particularly important to focus on hydrogen, looking at the global hydrogen boom that we're seeing. We are cooperating with a lot of our important trade partners, and it's important for our country to expand on this sector, and that also touches upon all the technologies derived from this. We want to use this opportunity here today to talk with partners in Germany on how to intensify our relations and to expand hydrogen production as well. And we need technologies and resources to do that. And we can make progress on renewables. And I think this is very constructive, and our visit here at BATD has been very constructive. And we could touch upon resources, minerals, etc. But I think what ultimately is important, bottom line, is that we make progress, and that we have to make progress, just as the developed countries are saying as well, in order to fight climate change. And that's what we're fighting for.
Muchas gracias. And I would like to now suggest that we take a quick look at the results of our audience poll, where we asked about the levers, and then I want to do a very short final round of questions on cooperation as a lever, because so many of you have mentioned the importance of that. So first, let's get a look at the results, dear technical team, if you'll show us that. So what are the most powerful levels for reducing global greenhouse gas emissions along the next 5 to 10 years? Expand renewable energy production capacity, say 38%, I believe that is. 26% say decarbonize industry. Another 14% say provide more and better project financing. Then we have around 11% saying replace fossil-based heating and cooling, and just 9% essentially saying increase energy efficiency. Now, international cooperation, of course, cuts across all of those fields. It can be a vehicle for essentially trying to use any or all of those levers. So let me now, beginning with Francesco La Camera, if I may, ask all of you to just say a word about where you see the most effective forms of international cooperation available to us now, whether it's multilateral, bilateral, regional, for translating ambition into action much more quickly. Francesco, please.
Very fast. In responding to this question, we have to reconnect with the narrative that we are proposing for beyond the COP28. We think that narrative imposes us to rewrite the way international cooperation works. Now, every entity is doing everything. It's very disorderly. We don't understand what is the role of the multilateral financial institutions. Development banks are competing among each other with the development agency and others. So in our point of view, the reform of the multilateral financial system is to point out naturally to have more concessional funds, and this is okay. But what is important is for what? Mm-hmm. So the multilateral financial institution, in our point of view, should be engaged in building the physical infrastructure that is needed to have more renewables into the grid. Call Marshall Plan for Africa, call Green Deal, call as you like. What is important is that the multilateral financial institution concentrates on building the infrastructure for the new energy system that is coming. Mm-hmm. Then we have, on the basis of this, we can recognize what the bilateral cooperation can do in the other pillars. So legal and policy, also agency as our, the regional entity. The development bank has to work on the projects, not the multilateral financial institutions. And what is important is that we have to recalibrate also, because without infrastructure, it's very difficult to invest in Africa. Only 1% of installed capacity last year was in Africa. This is really unfair, simply unfair. But without infrastructure, we cannot change that so soon. So in our point of view, and this is, I invite you to have a look to our veto, we have to try to rewrite our international cooperation work. How it's working now, I think it's not working effectively for the energy transition.
Thank you very much for that, because I must say, whenever I look into this subject and I'm confronted with all the acronyms of all the different windows, platforms, partnerships, it can be overwhelming, I think. And surely that is the case for countries as well as for journalists and moderators. Let me go over now to the minister from Madagascar, Mr. Andrea Manampisoa. And I know you've been working with both bilateral and multilateral partners, including, for example, Germany's GIZ, the World Bank, and others to advance renewable energy initiatives. So what would you consider the most effective forms of cooperation that you have at your disposal, including initiatives to de-risk, which you talked about as being so important? That's to you, sir. Yeah.
Merci. Pour le cas de Madagascar.
Thank you so much. Now, talking about Madagascar, we're closely cooperating with our international partners, and the World Bank has been supporting our government in our efforts to improve access to electricity and to improve the electricity sector in general. Now, there are a variety of financing means that we've received, and thanks to that, and thanks to the support by the IMF, we've received support for the large-scale projects in Madagascar, supporting our grid and expanding our grid in urban areas, and there's a lot of potential there, I think, for further development. The African Development Bank and the World Bank support further initiatives, especially hydrogen initiatives. and we are investing a lot in mini grids in rural areas. And our goal, of course, is that we work with the GIZ, with the French Development Bank, and you can see that we have a lot of partnerships that we're building on. And going beyond financing, our government is aiming at expanding public-private partnerships. We want to really take this a step further and promote transition to renewable energies. And as I've heard this morning, and I think there are going to be more panels this afternoon about green hydrogen, and based on this, I want to go into some detail on that. In Madagascar, we benefited from the geopolitical situation, and that allows us to better tap into that energy source. We have a lot of sun shining on our country, wind in the south, and we've got the Mozambique Channel, and that means there's a lot of potential really to use these new energies and to also promote production of green hydrogen. We have already adapted legislation in our country in order to attract more investment to Madagascar. And as the President of Kenya said yesterday, they and we as well want to become a hub for green hydrogen.
Let me go over to Minister Pannier-Runacher, if I may, once again. And I know that you are working with other countries, including Germany and international development banks, on the just energy transition partnerships that have been mentioned, not only in this session, but elsewhere in countries in Asia, in Africa. And you also co-founded the G7 Climate Club. So tell us a little bit, if you would, about where you see the advantages of these kind of initiatives in cooperation compared to so many of the others that are out there?
Well, first of all, I want to underline the fact that we are very aligned with Germany on how to crack the system and try to have very concrete projects on the field associating developing countries. So it has to be a win-win game. And as you mentioned, it has to be also an approach in which you have a target, a general target, and not on a project-by-project approach, and each time the country has to reassess why it is good to do this project and to go in the middle of a lot of institutions that are financing them. And we are not considering the country risk, but considering what is behind the project and why it is interesting to do it. And most renewable projects are competitive. From a pure competitive point of view, they are more competitive than oil and fossil fuels projects. So there is clearly an interest, a pure economic interest, to flow money to those projects. So JETP, it is a more innovative approach, a real cooperation and partnership that is not based only on one project, but a general goal. How do we ensure that we may switch from fossil in this area of the country to renewables? And how do we consider also the economic return for the country? So training the people, ensuring that SMEs will be associated to the project, and following the recommendation of the country, not imposing one's view. We have 3 projects that are already launched. The first, more advanced, I would say, is in South Africa. So as you may see, those countries have industrial bases, they have technological bases, and they contribute to the project to a large extent. And we will invest more than 8 billion euro within 3 to 5 years, with milestones and with objectives, even compliance, etc., but objectives. We have launched a project with in Vietnam and Indonesia, And we are negotiating currently project in India and Senegal. So it's a couple of countries. Sometimes it's France, sometimes it's Germany, it might be UK, United States. And both countries are negotiating the general frame, and then the G7 countries may come and donors may apply to have a, I would say, a holistic approach of how to concretely turn and deliver.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry that I'm making hand signals, but I'm hearing words in my ear saying that we need to move a bit, apropos accelerate. Let me go over to Sirpa Yavanpa to tell us very quickly, if you would, give us the example of how the Southeast Asia Energy Transition Partnership is working. Timeline, who's involved, maybe one example of the kind of thing you're looking at supporting, but super short if you could.
For short, it's very hard, but I want everyone to know who is Southeast Asia Energy Transition Partnership. So first of all, our founding members are France, Germany, United Kingdom, Canada, and then philanthropies such as Children's Investment Fund Foundation, Sequoia Climate Fund, IKEA Foundation, a few other foundations. So this is a private-public partnership. The partnership capitalizes on the shared intelligence and shared resolve to achieve these important targets. And how this partnership works really is we create a very strong localized network so that we can translate our programs and the shared vision to strategic communications that our stakeholders in the countries can absorb. And we connect our partnership with other partnerships, such as that was just mentioned, the Just Energy Transition Partnership. So we're very connected with technical working groups and all levels of work on the ground. So maybe one more point that I would like to mention is that given that the partnership, while they are very, very diverse members, they do share a strong and very assertive North goal in a way of energy transition, accelerating energy transition. So we can translate this to a very unhindered decision-making and strong programs, very bold and pioneering programs. So working together in this way reduces the risk. Obviously, it reduces the cost, but reduces the risk of taking very bold steps ahead. Thank you.
Very much. I am going to allow Minister Pannier to leave us now because unfortunately she does have a meeting with the State Secretary, so she will say goodbye. We aren't going to applaud because we're going to move straight on to Mr. Pardo. All right, we will applaud. Thank you very much for being with us. Mr. Pardo, could you imagine such a partnership, an energy transition partnership of the kind that we just heard described, being helpful to your country as it makes this very radical move away from fossil fuels to more green energy? And would it help, for example, to try to create the kind of good jobs that you're going to need for people who are leaving the fossil fuel sector?
Muy bien. Primero quería señalar que...
Well, first of all, let me point out that the energy transition is something that currently doesn't happen everywhere with solidarity, but we depend on cooperation. We all have to understand and recognize that this is a global challenge, and that means that we have to tackle these challenges together. I mean, this is not something that you can do alone. It is a tremendous effort and one that we as Colombia, that's always been very much depending on hydrocarbons, on fossil fuels, and our export has always focused on exporting hydrocarbons. And that means it's a big challenge for us, for our economy, to look at ways to replace that income that we generate with those exports, without really disrupting our economy and disrupting society. Looking on jobs, looking on interest rates that we are paying, and looking on violence that happens in our country. So we have to find a replacement for a lot of these things. And that means that this is a tremendous effort also in the context of international cooperation that we need. And I think that, yes, we have, due to the international, or with an international approach, have to compensate for that. And I think that, we're exporting up to 9.6 billion euros here in some of those areas, and that means that we have to replace that. We have to replace that with other exports, and we have to push for this. And we have to push for this without disrupting our economy, and as I said, in particular without disrupting our society. And let me just mention as an aside, I would like to thank the German government very much for their role that they played in facilitating the negotiations with the groups that we involved in restoring peace in our country. And that entails a lot of programs that also touch upon the labor market, and we have to create the right conditions and the right programs to reindustrialize our industry, to guarantee food security, and also facilitate the shift to renewables. All of that is going to need a lot of resources, and we will very much depend on international cooperation. So without causing too many disruptions in our country.
Thank you very much. And Deputy Director General, very briefly, if you would, please, what is your central message about international cooperation as you think of it in terms of accelerating this very, very important transition?
Well, thank you. Trade is part of the solution. It will accelerate decarbonization if it's mobilized optimally. Now, historically, the problem is absolutely the opposite that the one Francesco has been mentioning, is that nobody has wanted to take care of the trade dimension of decarbonization, because the Paris Agreement does not talk about trade, and the WTO did not want to talk about trade. So our problem is not too much governance, our problem is lack of governance on this dimension. It has started changing, and the WTO is starting in many ways to discuss this climate change dimension. What are we supposed to achieve? Two things. The first one is prevent a trade fragmentation of the world trading system out of climate policies, because if you take out trade, you will get very little benefit for the decarbonization and a lot of GDP losses. So that is the first key endeavor. The second one is try to boost decarbonization by liberalizing, when you can, technologies which are contributing to fight against climate change, and above all, starting a real discussion on fossil fuel subsidies.
Thank you very much. That discussion has been ongoing at the COPs, of course, but not always delivering all the results that many hoped. Last word to you, dear Minister Galushenko. Very, very briefly, if you would, please. Cooperation.
I really, of course, the cooperation is very important, but what I can tell now, I mean, taking into account what we already seen, what we're going through, not only we, I mean, the Europe, the fossil fuels is a big danger because of the dependence of fossil fuels. That's what we go through. I mean, in Europe, this winter, the last year, we see the enormous prices on gas. We see what happened with the prices on coal, how the supply is influenced the security for European countries. And I'm really very proud that the Europe maintained the solidarity, which allowed European countries to withstood the last year, this winter, and that is really very important. So that's what we discuss, that this green transition and renewables give you independence and safety. And fossil fuels, it gives you dependence. And that is very important to understand, because I hope we would never have, I mean, the civilized world would never have the situation of so much dependence, of so much danger, and so much increase of prices, of so much pressure to our people. And that is a very important issue. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much for those final words to this very insightful and very, very constructive panel. Let's give our panelists a warm round of applause.